Gregory is the principal investigator for Canadian Spectrum Policy Research and assistant professor in the Department of Communication, Media and Film at the University of Calgary. He's the author of Shut Off, the Canadian Digital Television Transition, 2013. Yeah, the last good year. Greg first came to our attention from his McGill doctoral dissertation, Canadian Broadcasting Policy and the Digital Television Transition. It was a roadmap for me for the digital transition. Since then, I've watched his career with interest and admiration, and Friends has commissioned research from Greg to enhance our understanding of the digital transition through comparisons between various countries' audiovisual systems. So Greg's topic today, Canadian public broadcasting and the digital evolution. Okay.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Ian, and for everyone for coming, and for Friends for having me here today. I'm glad that Ian put some emphasis there on the E in evolution. I'm not going to be talking about revolutions as much today, and I'll get to that in a second. It's also going to be a bit of a history lesson involved. Coming back to Toronto, I'm in Calgary now, but for years I worked just up the street here at Ryerson. And downstairs from in the Ted Rogers School of Management over here was a Best Buy. And if you work in communications, sometimes it's good to have a Best Buy around because you can kind of see what's coming through and what this might mean. And so I'm going to go way back in a bit of a history lesson today to those glory years of 2014. And in Best Buy, the big item at the time was the 3D TV. That this was going to change everything. And everybody at Best Buy was going in and trying on the glasses, and broadcasters were getting ready because 3D was going to be the big new movement happening in television. Somewhere in the world, there are warehouses right now filled with 3D TVs. China, probably. But what I'm getting at today is how this these various avenues that are opening up with these incredible digital moment that we're facing sometimes can lead down paths that don't go anywhere. And I think that it's incumbent on public broadcasters in particular to be careful of these things and to make sure that we stick to our policy objectives and don't get distracted by some of the shiny things that we might be finding along the way. And I think the CBC is guilty of this in recent years, and I'll be talking about that a bit today. The other thing I wanted to point out to draw on one of Bob McChesney's earlier books, that we are at a critical juncture right now in this country. And part of that, yes, there's the technology, there's the economic upheaval, but we also, specific to Canada, have this moment where the government has announced this year that they are revisiting both the Broadcasting Act and Telecom Act in Canada. This doesn't happen too often. We haven't done this since '91. And so I think that we do have this moment where we have to, as academics, as people who work in this area, to recognize we are in this moment of change and to bring forth a lot of ideas, but also to recognize some of the problems that might happen along the way. Part of what happened this year, one of the blips that we've had along the way, is that in the US in particular, just a few months ago, a lot of major advertisers pulled their products from YouTube, and then later on there was another problem that developed, or controversy around Facebook and the proliferation of fake news on Facebook, causing a lot of advertisers to have second guesses on what seemed like a steamroller, an inevitable movement toward online advertising. Hit a bit of a bump this year, and I think that there are going to be several bumps along the way as we move forward in a lot of these new technologies. I think that Academia also has been guilty at times of overplaying the moment, of bringing forth, for example, this idea of post-broadcasting, this idea that broadcasting is somehow something of the past, is something that also has been pitched in a lot of academic communities for about 2 decades right now. How many of us right now are in departments where 10 years ago were working feverishly to develop new media centers or to new media courses? I don't know exactly how fully new a lot of this is, and this is why I'm using the term evolution as opposed to revolution, that this is something that's been going on since the 90s. That book's 2007. There was another book that came out about post-broadcasting in 1996. Oh, I don't need that. Oh, I went the wrong way. There we go. Part of what we've seen in Canada is this idea that cord cutting is ending broadcasting as we know it. This has been something that has been going on for years in Canada, that the customers are cutting their cable and that they're soaring, the numbers are soaring all over, and that broadcasting as we know it is finished. I would argue that the exact opposite is what's true, is that broadcasting, despite all the changes and hurdles that we've seen over the last several years, has remained remarkably viable in this system, and that what we might see as an eclipsing of old media is not that simple. That what we're seeing is a new balance that's being struck, but broadcasting certainly is not going away. 2013 got a lot of coverage, the advertising 2013 got a lot of coverage because that is the year that online advertising surpassed television. That the advertising world that drives so much of our privately based, and in Canada, in the public system where the CBC relies on advertising, there was this movement toward the internet, and the online world was going to dominate and eclipse the broadcasting as we've known it. And I'm going to today take a look at how this affected the CBC in Canada. And I'm going to talk about a few things. I'm going to take a look at how the CBC has eagerly embraced this idea of post-broadcasting. I'm going to take a look at an example, and I'm glad that Philip Savage is in the room. We'll be talking about an example from Hamilton that looks at the post-broadcasting possibilities of the CBC. Because we're in Canada and because the Stanley Cup playoffs start tonight, I'm going to be discussing hockey and how this fits in with what it is that we're talking about. And I'm also going to be taking a look at how a lot of stuff seems to be rolling back from this enthusiastic embrace of the post-broadcasting world. In particular, the CBC seems to be having a bit of second thoughts on a lot of what we've seen, in particular when it comes to issues of mobility. I think for most of us in the room, we're well acquainted with what the CBC is supposed to do in this country. And this is right out of the Act, that it's to be made available throughout Canada by the most appropriate and efficient means, and this always difficult one about reflecting Canada and its regions to audiences. The CBC has for years, I'm not going to go on too much about digital television because I've done enough on that. I feel that I've had that battle and quite bluntly, I lost. But what it does show, I think, is of this era that the CBC has been looking toward a post-broadcasting world for a long time. When I did my work on digital television, I noticed that in 2002, the CBC had asked the CRTC to allow the digital transition just in the 10 largest markets in Canada. This goes back to 2002. So the CBC at that point was already thinking that it didn't want to invest in the infrastructure required to bring about a full and complete digital transition, which was how the transition was envisioned at that time. In 2007, they asked for a subscriber fee, which was in essence fee for carriage. And then in 2011, the CBC just quietly announced to the CRTC that they're not going to complete the transition. And they only completed it in a few markets in the country. They were supposed to do everything. and they just basically said no. And it remains that way. This image here is Southern Ontario. The black circles are where the CBC used to have broadcasting in Southern Ontario. The blue circles are what's left. The blue circles are the digital over-the-air ads that, or transmissions that still exist in this part of Ontario. So we lost a lot of coverage during the digital transition, and as my research points out, the CBC saw that coming from a long way off, and in my view never really made an effort to try to maintain broadcasting as we'd known it. Here's my home now in Alberta. You can see again the blue circles, that's what's left. All the black circles are gone. Those are the transmissions that were shut down during the digital television transition. So again, my point just being that the CBC has been moving toward this idea of something beyond broadcasting for quite some time.
Or is that just Calgary and Edmonton?
Yes, it is. If I can go back, yeah, Calgary and Edmonton is all that's left in there. So the CBC in 2014 brought forth its major initiative that was going to take us into the digital world, and it was called a Space for Us All, and it was brought forth in 2014. It was going to start taking effect in 2015 and was going to lead the country as far as our digital or our public broadcasting into 2020. It looked like this. This was the front page of this essential report. It shows a Canada that is young, multicultural. It's summertime, there's no snow on the ground. And most importantly, they're all carrying cell phones. This was the world that the CBC envisioned in 2014. Now, to go back to that chart, this is the time where advertising on the online world has just passed television. The other thing that happened at this point is that this is also right when the CBC had just lost the rights to Hockey Night in Canada, to Rogers. And the CBC was looking for a new way in which to find itself in Canada, and it was convinced that this is how it would be done. It would be done through the online world. I'm not going to go through all of these, and I understand that it would be a little, you don't necessarily want to go through all of them. But I do want to point out that among what it says it's going to do here, it's going to move from broad to focused. Okay, that calls into question really what broadcasting is in the first place. It wanted very specific, focused on specific markets, which calls into question some of the bigger picture elements of broadcasting as to whether or not it was ever even there. It calls into question Habermasian ideas of the public sphere. And this idea of moving from conventional to digital, from producer to multi-platform, fixed to flexible, and then the last one is really key. Moving from cost-cutting to financially sustainable. Also to take into consideration the larger political environment at the time, this was seen as a way to accommodate the cuts imposed by the Harper government. And so the online world was seen as a cheaper way to bring about content and to not use the traditional broadcasting elements that they saw as too expensive at the time. And this is key. This is the kind of the central slide of what I'm doing today is this one, where from this report, it says at the heart of the plan is flipping content priorities from a traditional approach to mobile first, so that by 2020, Canada, our public broadcaster, would largely be an online mobile experience. So they were going to flip it. Right now, television, this is in 2014, television and radio on top. By 2020, radio and television are third and fourth on the list. So there was going to be this essential flip in how services were provided in Canada. So if that was the future, we have a few nice case studies that give us an example of how this might affect us as Canadians if the public broadcaster were to move away from broadcasting and toward more of an online service. The first happened in Calgary last year. Oh, sorry, 2 years ago now. I'm a year behind. In the last federal leadership debate. There was a leadership debate that happened in Calgary during that campaign, and almost nobody saw it. It was an online-only feature. It was streamed, and in some ways, it was brought by the Globe and Mail, and no major television carriers in English Canada carried it. So the audience was an average audience of 1.5 million viewers for that debate. As a point of comparison, MasterChef gets about 2 million. So we were nowhere near MasterChef areas. It got 440,000 views on YouTube, and this was trumpeted as a big victory, showing that the online world was really now rising to prominence. Well, as a point of comparison, in 2011, when it was carried by CBC, CTV, and Global, there were 10.6 million viewers for the debate. So this idea that somehow we could move on to an online platform and still have the same sort of democratic involvement or democratic participation and engagement was proven wrong. John Doyle in the Globe called this a national disgrace. I again argue that broadcasting still matters and is still resilient, and that's actually one of the prime stories of this era, is not that broadcasting is going away. Music has gone away, and Torontonians in the room might recognize why I have the new Ryerson Student Center on Yonge Street as an example of the dying music industry. Torontonians, why have I got that up there? Do you know? Thank you very much. Yes, it was Sam the Record Man. And that where Sam the Record Man once stood, there is no more music industry. So that is kind of, to me, a symbol of an industry that has died or is in the process of being substantially revamped. The numbers aren't quite the same for television, but television has tried to spin this to its advantage. Netflix is launched here in 2010. Canada is the first country outside of the US to get Netflix as a streaming service, and by April 2011, broadcasters were already petitioning the CRTC to tax it and try to limit its growth. So this is already being used as an economic tool at the regulator that the other industries are suffering. They haven't necessarily suffered. Here are this is some of the most recent data from the CRTC. Yes, there's been a drop in cable between 2011, when Netflix is introduced, and 2015 now. It's dropped about 5%. Its growth has dropped 5%. And the amount that it's making has dropped about 4%. But you can then also take a look. The other one and I'm likely going to walk out of the shot. I'll go over to this one. Look at IPTV. Basically, people have not left cable. They've just moved over to the new cable that Bell offers, like Fibe. We actually do not have a dying cable industry. It's just one that's in a slight transition. There isn't, we aren't seeing a dying industry like Sam the Record Man. So despite the protests from television and trying to use it to its regulatory advantage, the numbers don't back it up. I'm not going to go through all this, but yes, the numbers are dropping, but they're not dropping like music industry numbers. So there's changes happening, but it's not the way that we've seen in other areas. Also, this is a percentage of Canadians who watch TV exclusively online. This was the rationale for the CBC to say that they had to get to the mobile audience, was that they were increasingly, this is where Canadians watch TV. Well, this is the most recent data. And it's saying that in Anglo-Canada, about 10% of us watch TV online on a regular basis. It's nothing near what the television numbers are. And the CBC at that point had started to steer our national public broadcaster in the direction of that 10%. Likelihood of Canadians cutting the cords, basically about 44% say they're not going to do it. So yes, there's a chance people might cut it, but it's not numbers that should cause any huge degree of concern as far as the future of television or broadcasting. As Barry Keifel, an analyst in Canadian media, has pointed out, now particularly the last part of this, the use of these internet video services is greatly exaggerated. For example, Netflix says its subscribers account for 125 million hours of TV shows and movies daily, But of that, it's in 190 countries. Canadians alone watch that much traditional TV each day. Netflix has not replaced Canadian television. It has found a niche within Canadian television, but it is not removing anything else from the market. And these are US numbers. And this is the most recent data from Nielsen. If you just look at the top two, TV and TV-connected devices still account for over 92% of television viewing in the US. This is not a mobile-only market, or even a mobile-dominated market. TV is still king. So this is 2 years after the CBC report is issued, and TV is still dominant. Broadcasting is not going without kicking and screaming. Again, I'm going to hammer this home. The heart of the plan is flipping content priorities from traditional approach to mobile first. The data's not there. We don't really have an example where it's worth flipping around how the whole thing works. Okay, to Hamilton. If you're not from Toronto, thank you, Philip. Yeah, you're applauding yourself. So Hamilton, an hour down the road, was the largest Canadian market without a CBC affiliate. And then in 2012, in part of what CBC dubbed their local expansion plan, it was given a CBC station, but it was fully digital. It in some ways was the perfect example of what the CBC saw as the future of public broadcasting in Canada. So just as in A Space for Us All, it was going to be digital, it was going to be mobile. Well, here it is. It was in Hamilton in 2012. And this gives us a petri dish. And fortunately, an organization called Civic surveyed 217 Hamiltonians after about a year after, Philip, am I right? It was about a year after the service came out, give or take? No, it had the Civic plan. Okay. Well, the results were that 70% indicated that the local service was not meeting their expectation, and 91% wanted to see local audio programming on par with other communities. In other words, they wanted a radio station. They wanted a broadcaster. What they got was the CBC that was envisioned for the future. Okay, Stanley Cup Finals start tonight, and the CBC and hockey go together a long time. But as I think most people in here would know, the CBC lost the rights to Hockey Night in Canada to Rogers. And this headline from cart.ca, well, Stanley Cup TV ratings dip, online viewing surges. Online viewing surges because it came from virtually nothing about 5 years ago. There was no online viewing. You can really grow rapidly when you start from about 100 viewers. And so there was some pretty rapid growth in online. But the numbers have not been there. So A Space for Us All is done in the aftermath of losing the rights. The CBC still carries the games, but Rogers takes all advertising revenue on the CBC. And in the spring, the CBC carries playoffs games virtually every night with no revenue. And the deal was the CBC didn't pay for content. So we're now at the end of that deal. For a lot of people, if you were a hockey fan and a public broadcasting fan in Canada, this might have happened and you thought, oh, this is the end of the world as you knew it. Okay, we're at the end of what was supposed to be the time that the CBC was showing games, in essence, for free from Rogers. Rogers allowed them the content. And just this year, Rogers had an option to extend the deal for a 5th year and quietly exercised it. So now Rogers wants access to the CBC to show these games. And Moore from Rogers, who used to be with the CBC, had said he would like to extend this relationship beyond 2017-18 and hopes talks begin soon. So once again, you've got this idea that broadcasting is still central to all of this. The huge company that bought the rights recognizes they're in a bit of trouble. They can't access audiences the way the CBC can. And so right now in this country, we've got Rogers trying to get our public broadcaster on board because they paid $5.2 billion to access hockey games in Canada, and they need a broadcaster with the type of range that the CBC has. Again, broadcasting matters. Rogers got all the mobile and digital rights. They can stream it online, but that's not where we are. So why are they trying to do it? Well, for the CBC's coverage, not for mobile users. That's not really what's at stake here. In the US, the NHL got a $2 billion deal with Comcast, NBC Universal. Please note, that was $2 billion. Rogers paid $5.2 for Canada for 12 years. That provided the company with the exclusive right to live NHL broadcasts against all platforms. This idea of digital is now part of the broadcasting rights. I can show other examples from around the world, but what they've basically found is that we have to wrap it up? Okay. Okay. The digital rights have not been paying off around the world for things like football in the UK. They've been paying a premium and they're not getting the audiences they thought they were going to get. I'm going to jump ahead. There's a change right now at the CBC, and this has only been in the last year. The new corporate strategy has just come out and it now says, in Strategy 2020, we promised we would not leave TV and radio behind as we transform ourselves into a modern, more relevant public broadcaster. Remember, they were going to flip. That was the whole purpose of the 2014 study. Now they've started to walk back from that a bit. The mobile first previous heart has waned. In the newest document, mobile first is mentioned 3 times. Now, okay, so how does that compare to what they used to do? I went through all the corporate plans for the last 3 years. In 2014, a space for us all was mentioned 25 times in the document. Next time, 40. This year, 0. They've absolutely cut the report. They do not use the title anymore. And they're moving away from the mobile first strategy, which is only mentioned 3 times. So we now have this very prompt movement away and people realizing that, oh yes, broadcasting still matters. The CBC manages to keep a public trust that other broadcasters envy and cannot match. This just came out last week, out of University of Victoria. Most trusted brands in Canada. The first is Mountain Equipment Co-op. Yeah. Everybody in here just thinking of their raincoats and how good they are right now. But the top media property is the CBC, tied with Apple in this country. Disney is 42nd and Netflix is 45. So out of over 6,000 people surveyed, the CBC maintains this type of recognized connection with Canadians, and Rogers would love to have that. So the appetite for broadcasting is still strong in Canada. The NHL rights purchased by Rogers looks better for the CBC every day, as Rogers is still trying to make that work for them. The CBC remains a trusted brand in Canada, and there appears to be a quiet retreat from some of the mobile-first rhetoric of the 2014, plan, A Space for Us All. I will go back to this. A quote from Leora Salter and Felix Adarte Wellington: although today's new technologies may pose an almost insurmountable challenges to broadcasting regulation, they're not the first to do so. Canada has been through this before. And lastly, as we begin the process of modernizing the Telecom Act and Broadcasting Act, stay focused on policy objectives, what it is that we want from our system. No, we are not looking to be distracted by the newest 3D TV that pops up at Best Buy. And despite the new media hyperbole, the evolution will be televised. Thank you. Sure, Phil, I knew you were going. Philip Savage is from McMaster and has done some work on the Hamilton CBC. Yeah.
Am I allowed to go ahead? I mean, he's given me the permission, but I look to you.
Just this one.
Just this once, okay. Philip Savage from the Department of Communication Studies and Multimedia at McMaster University. So we did a survey with the users of the Hamilton service, and it came out almost exactly the same. This was done by Leger. What was interesting was at the same time, people didn't realize this, but Kitchener-Waterloo had been promised that they would have an update on coverage. Because there was a radio frequency available, they started doing a morning show that just cut into the main CBL, the sort of Southern Ontario feed on Radio 1. And we talked to them about that. And I'll tell you, there's all the quantitative stuff showed that the radio morning show was the thing that was really grabbing the audience attention. But on a qualitative side, I want to go a little bit beyond the technology. I think that part of what has been enduring about the CBC more than other broadcasters is the storytelling aspect about communities and communities to the country. And what the Hamilton users were saying was we don't get a sense of the Hamilton story coming out. There's not a narrative. Mm-hmm. For a while, the CBC launched with the geo-tagging. There was this, I've done some screen captures of the first, and it was all about geo-tagging, which was very, very hip 3 or 4 years ago. And nobody understood it. We did focus groups. We showed it to people, and they said, what is this? We have no idea what relevance it is to telling the story. So the storytelling element, and we found that essentially what you find with media users generally, people, is that they want it all. Obviously they want it all, but they want the best way to tell the story of their community. And they were listening to Matt Galloway on Metro Morning from Toronto and waiting for that one Hamilton story, even long after the website was launched. Mm-hmm. So you hit it right on, but I think there is the narrative aspect of it, the storytelling aspect that goes a little bit beyond policy, and I think the CRTC and Heritage Canada kind of gets it sometimes, but don't fully understand the impact of that. But Kitchener-Waterloo worked because they had an ongoing voice about their community.
Why couldn't they do that online? Why not have it more like a local podcast online?
So here's the real story about the CBC and with Bob McChesney and the prominent political economist. Mm-hmm. It's all about the money. Mm-hmm. They did not want to go down that road. They did not want to have that level of journalistic investment. There are 5 people working for CBC Hamilton. One is an executive producer and one is technical. And there are 3 reporters. Hmm. That hasn't changed. Now that's a darn sight better than what they had before, but it just shows the paucity. But I mean, Hamilton area, what they service is a population of probably about 1 million people. Yeah. The population of Atlantic Canada, where I grew up, is about 2 million, let's say, and they have about 60 reporters. It's just not. I think the driving force for the CBC, for a lot of sane reasons, was not to put any fixed costs into new expansion because they thought that they would be exposed for that, and nothing was going to deter them from doing that. But they were wrapping it up as the shiny new technology, exactly in the Space for All rhetoric. Yeah. And they found it hard to back down from that, even when there were obvious examples, like Kitchener-Waterloo, where it didn't play to the audience service that it could have.
Yeah, I found that going through this, so that you got, this rhetoric of being forward-thinking, where it was really about budget cuts. Not so far below the surface. You didn't have to scratch too far to realize, no, this is about accommodating budget cuts. The Liberals gave a one-time infusion of cash last year to the CBC. Suddenly, a Space for Us All is missing from the corporate plan.
Well, I'll also speak to one of the things that part of the sponsors of this conference, Friends, has, I think, identified is a governance issue at the CBC. And the people who make the decisions have to pay lip service to the journalistic and content provision, the producers and the reporters. But in fact, they want to limit their financial risk. That's what they want to do. And they don't necessarily understand the value. They're not very good at expressing the real value of Canadian storytelling and community storytelling. And you know, certain senior people who I interviewed a few years ago basically said, we're not interested in the regions because it exposes us too much. It exposes us too much. And we may not be able to sustain it.
Right.
I don't think that's specifically malevolent, but it's certainly not in the nature of what I think most Canadians think about what the CBC is supposed to do.
Yeah.
That's my 2 cents.
All right. Well, thank you. That was a few cents, and it was all good. Yeah, Peter?
Hi. Greg, that was great. I really look forward to you doing this with the cowboy hat and the boots. Or maybe you can take a leaf off Jim Shaw and arrive on the Harley next time.
Those are Calgary jokes, by the way.
Yes, those are Calgary jokes. I want to ask you how we balance your very truthful comments that this is not a dying industry with the reality that complacency should not be the order of the day. Because I just want to throw out some other numbers, because every number you used is true, but you know what they say about statistics. So a couple of other numbers. Penetration of BDU services, that's television services like cable, decreased from 82.8% in 2012 to 78.5% in 2015. So you don't have just declines in absolute terms, you have huge declines in the number of Canadians that are subscribing to television services because of cord cutting, et cetera, like that. Now, during that time, again, this is good news.
Wait, can I respond just to that stat to start with?
Please.
78% is still pretty good market penetration.
And
I think that, you know,
I agree.
I don't see that as a dying industry. I see that as extremely healthy.
Let me finish my question.
Okay.
You had your 20 minutes. I get my 2. Okay, I get 2.5. Another stat. Again, 5-year subscriber losses are 8%. You said 5%. 5-year losses from 2012 are 8%. And that's just to 2012. It'll be more. Now, to your point that all is not lost, here's the interesting thing. During that time, television distributors increased revenue. So while the number of subscribers went down, the revenue per subscriber went up, and the increased revenue to the tune of 5% to 2015. And it's believed when we get the final numbers for 2017, they'll be up marginally. Now, okay, that's the balanced picture. Meanwhile, let's look at conventional television. Conventional television declined in revenue, that's local TV stations, from $2.14 billion in 2011 to $1.76 billion in 2015. That's a massive decline. That's a 20+% decline. Specialty has done okay. So you've lost big on local TV, but specialty done okay. So the net loss for the industry is modest, 3.55 to 3.22. Now, why am I throwing those numbers out? I'm throwing those numbers out because on the one hand, you're absolutely right. The sky is not falling. On the other hand, there's real issues here. And what we know about public policy and what I'm seeing in this government, and unless they get hammered on the head with this is a problem you have to deal with, they're not going to do anything. And that's, to me, that's the big risk. The risk with saying the sky isn't falling, you know, it's not as bad as it could be, is that no one does nothing. And we all know the story of the boiling frog, okay? We got a boiling broadcasting system. So how do we strike a better balance?
Okay, I don't know that I can entirely fix the economics of the current broadcasting system in one answer, but I do think that, among other things, is to recognize, I'm not saying, for example, discount the mobile and online world entirely. To me, this is part of the new mix that will become Canadian public broadcasting. My main point today was don't throw out the established broadcasting system. There's no doubt a lot of the local funding right now is in big trouble. And honestly, I don't have the easy answer for something like that. It could be a reestablishment of the local programming funds. There are other ways in which we could go about encouraging the growth of local television. There are ways in which we've done that in the past through local advertising, through must-carry on cable. There are other ways in which we can go about doing this. It also just might be that this is going to become a smaller industry. and that maybe it's going to be half the size that it used to be. And maybe that's just how we're going to have to live with it. I can't pretend to give you a clear answer on that one, Peter, and the points are absolutely legit. When I say the sky's not falling, it's certainly raining quite a bit. There's no doubt about that. So sorry if I'm not giving a full answer. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Scott. I'm an MA student at Ryerson's Comcult program, and I have a question more related to demographics and cord cutting.
Yep.
I wonder if you think, well, first of all, if the technological habits of millennials, I guess, will kind of reflect that of baby boomers. Some stats that I have here from recent essays I've written from the Poynter Institute say that over 60% of baby boomers prefer old media, and similar numbers of that, even higher, like 70% of millennials prefer mobile media. Mm-hmm. So it is something that, Canada is older than it is younger. We have more baby boomers than we do millennials. I wonder if you think that it's just we're early right now, and as millennials grow up, there's going to be obvious. I love asking my friends if they have cable, and most people I know that are around my age or in their 20s do not have cable. My brother's just cut the cord. He's about 28.
Yeah.
I wonder if you think if demographics play an issue.
There's no doubt, Scott, that millennials are the group that's got the industry worried the most. There's absolutely no question about that. It's a matter of when that really hits the critical mass that we start to see the collapse like we saw in the music industry. I think it will happen eventually, but I think that we could still be, for example, in Europe, they don't see that happening until about 2030, where they've reestablished, for example, the spectrum for over-the-air television in Europe. They've just solidified it till about 2030. And so they see that as still being necessary for about that amount of time. I think you're right. Boomers are carrying the cable industry that we're seeing right here. And why is it that the providers can still make more profits? It's because your mom and dad won't cut their cable. It doesn't matter how much their bill goes up. The people just keep paying. So there's no doubt that the older generation is still driving that industry. So if your question is, do the demographic shifts here matter? Absolutely. But the CBC had it set to flip everything by 2020. And this is what I want to keep hammering. I don't see that as being a smart move by the CBC. If they change that to 2030, maybe. 2040, probably, I'd say for sure. But so yes, demographics absolutely matter. And but I think that to jump the gun to 2020 was about saving money and accommodating cuts, not about fixing the system for any particular demographic shift. Thanks.
Just pretend I'm not the organizer and I just wanted to ask a question.
Yes, you fellow over there.
I'm going to say, I'd like you to comment on my takeaway from your presentation. Two things. An indictment of the competence of the people making decisions at our national public broadcaster, and an unwillingness to admit making a mistake, and thereby a willingness to deceive their customers, the citizens of Canada. Just wonder what you think about that.
Okay. On the first part, this gets to an issue that the Friends of Canadian Broadcasting has really been taking an admirable leadership role in this country, which is how the board of directors at the CBC is chosen. And as Friends likes to point out, that most of them are conservative members who are on the board of directors right now, and that this decision was made again to accommodate cuts to the CBC. So I think absolutely it shines a very negative light on the people that run that are on the board. I should add that I published an article about this in 2016. Karen Wersig from the Canadian Media Guild sent it out to all people who work for the CBC in Canada and said, you should read this. And the workers at the CBC were quite upset about this because they knew what it was, which was a way to cut back. It wasn't, it was, it was really hiding a wolf in sheep's clothing. So I think that this is really about the This was something that was brought forward by the board of directors. It was about cutbacks. It wasn't about vision. And can you give me the second part again of your question?
Well,
second.
It was a combination of competence and deceit. Those were the
Yeah, well, it's a loaded question. Were they deceitful? Either deceitful or they were perhaps taken by the shiny things at Best Buy. That they thought that we've got to have, for example, the other thing I could say right now is 4K is the big thing that's coming right now for television. We've been told that's coming now for about 4 years. Hasn't happened yet. So there might have been some people who did honestly think that mobile first was the right way. As I say, I think that academia is complicit in this to a degree. So were they deceitful? They're political lackeys. They were there. They were put in there to to help realize some of the budget issues that the conservatives wanted to see. So, calling them political lackeys, I don't think is very diplomatic of me at all. But I guess it's what they were.
It's only on video.
Okay, don't worry. Yeah. Yes. Okay. Yeah.
Hi, Greg. I take your point about the shiny new things. There's actually reams being written today about the potential death of the smartphone in 5 years. So just goes to show you how a mobile-first strategy can backfire. But I wanted to ask you about something that's perhaps not the shiny new thing, and it's ATSC 3.0. And there's been some interesting developments in the States about the next generation of over-the-air broadcasting, which could have a return path for the over-the-air broadcaster, perhaps have some targeted information about who's consuming the signal, and potentially even work with smartphones or whatever mobile device replaces smartphones 5 to 10 years from now.
Yeah.
And do you think that's something that the CBC should be looking at, given that it is something that seems to be bubbling to the surface in the States?
Yeah, okay, so thanks, Raj. For those who don't know, this is the next generation of the digital over-the-air system. And this infuriates me because, to me, we've scrapped our over-the-air system in this country. I thought it was short-sighted at the time. I still think it's short-sighted. Canada, in the previous generation of over-the-air television, never used it to its full potential. You can do 4 sub-channels on one channel over the air. We never had that option. If you could get 20 to 30 channels in Toronto with an antenna, we would have a much more vibrant broadcasting system here within the city, and it would help local broadcasting. So I think now, when you're talking about as far as the next technological wave, of course we have to be looking at these things as they develop, and I wish that we had an architecture in place that was ready to bend with these things as they come along. So I actually think our Broadcasting Act isn't a bad piece of legislation. It's quite technologically neutral in how it's written. But what we've done by not thinking about architecture and the infrastructure of broadcasting is that I think we have limited that door. We've kind of closed that door for over-the-air. Hopefully it can open again. But I thought it was short-sighted of us to shut it down in the first place. And I think that there is possibilities for the ATSC 3.0 when it comes out. It could be fantastic. The US is going to be in much better shape to take advantage of that than Canada is going to be, because we've lost our over-the-air system, except in the few cities, and the CBC wants to shut those down too. So, sorry I don't have much more to say, because it's still brand new technology. I don't know that much about it.
Last question.
Last question.
Hi, I'm Karen Smith from Brock. Greg, I was wondering if you had any comments about how open data or data-driven journalism have been positioned within the discourses of a digital-first environment for public broadcasting.
Open data and data-first journalism? I guess my short answer, Karen, would be no. I don't have a lot. In fact, well, can I ask you, what are you doing work in this field? I don't do work in that area. So
I've seen a couple of announcements with some of the new CBC hubs opening up, Waterloo and London, with some positioning around how data-driven journalism and the use of open data sets by journalists, how that will be discussed. But I've seen just smidges of it at this point. So I'd be happy to continue the conversation.
Oh, you've seen a smidgen more than me then. I don't know that area, but it sounds like an interesting new branch.
Thanks.
All right. Thank you.